Hey, creative. Are you ready to discuss profits, the money, the ways to make it happen? The Profitable Creative Podcast is for you, the creative, how you define it. Videographers, photographers, entrepreneurs, marketing agencies, you get it. CEO of Core Group and author Christian Brim interviews industry experts, creative entrepreneurs, and professionals alike who strive to be creative and make money at the same time. Sound like you? Tune in now. It's time for profit.
Welcome to another episode of The Profitable Creative, the only place on the interwebs where you will learn how to turn your passion into profit. I am your host, Christian Brim. Special shout out to our one listener in Pepperell, Massachusetts. That's a fantastic name, Pepperell. Never been to Massachusetts. I need to go. No, that's not true. I've been to Boston, but I've definitely never been to Pepperell. Anyway, I'm rambling. Joining me today, Michael Buckbee. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much. I also have been to Massachusetts, but not Pepperell. So I don't know if that's a qualification.
Have you heard of Pepperell?
No, but now I'm intrigued. Let's just say I'm intrigued. That's a cool name. So.
Yes, I started this a while ago where I would just look at the last 5 episodes and see who had one listen, one download. And I found some fascinating little towns.
Cool.
Yeah. So why don't you tell the audience, Michael, I neglected to say what company you're with. I apologize. So tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my background is really in software development and marketing. And so I've done a mix of those things in a lot of different industries at a lot of different scales for a lot of different years. And currently, I'm the co-founder of a startup called Noatoa, which, there's a lot of different ways to pitch your thing. I think the best way to describe it to your audience is what we do is we try to wrangle the knowledge that's in AI services. So things like ChatGPT. What does it know about me? How does it work? What's it saying? And with that, there's both an element of wanting to keep things correct, like, is it saying the right things about my company? Mm-hmm. And then also there's an element of like, hey, we're in a competitive landscape. How do I do better than my competitors? How do I show up best? How do I find people? Yeah.
I love it. So how did you come up with the name Noatoa?
So I have seen a lot of companies get wrapped around trademark stuff. Mm-hmm, and so kind of coming up with an evocative name that doesn't really have any meaning, that you can just own, but that's still easy to say, I've always found to be an advantage. And when we started this, even a lot of the terms that people were using have already changed. So Google has something now that's called AI overviews, but that used to be called the search generative experience. And then, it was called the generative experience. And so all these names are always changing. But what I'm really interested in is the underlying knowledge of what these services have. And so, at a real base level, what we're doing is we're interrogating them, asking ChatGPT a question of like, what do you recommend for this? Or who is this? And then analyzing the answer. So we don't actually do really any AI processing in our service, which is kind of ironic. It's much more a kind of a watchdog to see what these services know and that knowledge in Noatoa. So, yeah.
So really, Noatoa is just made up and has no basis in reality. Is that what I got out of that?
It has at least a little basis, as it's, trying to be a profitable and it's a creative name. So that's the best I've got for
okay.
podcast.
Right. Yeah. So it wasn't referencing the biblical figure of Noah.
No.
It wasn't a play on Krakatoa.
It rhymes with Krakatoa, but it's Know. So.
Okay. All right. Now it's making a little more sense. Yeah. All right. See. Okay. So let's talk about how you got to this point of doing Noatoa. Sure. Like what prompted you? Well, what did your journey look like that got you there?
Sure. So I am a serial entrepreneur, starting lots of different stuff, doing lots of different things. And the last service that I created with my co-founder then and my co-founder now You talk to a lot of the people that are in a similar spot. And so we had this network of other software as a service founders. And we were just kind of joking one day about ChatGPT, like, I wonder what it says about my company. And so we all put that in and we all found horrible mistakes, like horrible things about us that just weren't accurate. And so I was like, oh, that's kind of funny. But that night I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then the next day I got up and I wrote a little script that just ran on my Mac that interrogated automatically ChatGPT for a couple questions and then spit out a spreadsheet that then could look at what the answers were and kind of track that week over week. And I did that for a couple other people in the group and sent it to them and just didn't really think that much of it. But what happened was I started to get a trickle of people coming back and saying, hey, Mike, we just had like 3 customers sign up and they all said they used ChatGPT to find us. Can I get an update of that spreadsheet? I'm like, maybe there's something here. So, the last year has really been automating that and making it a real application and making it an actual thing, people could just show up and use and not like request things of me. But, in a world of a lot of analytics and a lot of people trying to do more stuff, by far, I think the most accurate measure of like how well your marketing is doing is just sending an email to people after they sign up or that they, buy something that says, hey, how'd you hear about us? And
Right.
that I've seen across a lot of different industries and a lot of different places perform much better in terms of like really understanding where your customers are at and how things are going than, a lot of the fancier tools. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, it feels like the fancier tools are just chasing this very ethereal attribution model that is impossible. It's like nailing Jello.
Yeah.
You can't figure it out.
Well, garbage in, garbage out. Like it doesn't matter how cool the graphs look if the data that's going into it is just wildly off. So.
Well, it's also interesting, like, you can ask that question, how did you find us? But that's just what they remember. That doesn't tell you what all of the things that you did that attributed them to finding you. To your point, we have had a couple of people reach out to us that had found us on ChatGPT, and we were kind of surprised about that, like because not a lot of people. I mean, organic is a source of traffic from us, but that's a very broad term. Like I don't know. I don't know how they found us. So it was surprising to me that they said that they found us through ChatGPT. But okay. So before we start this conversation, I want to get. So you have background in SEO or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. For almost a decade, I was a director of demand generation and over a content team at like a public cybersecurity company with lots of traffic and lots of people and sales and things.
Okay.
And so, that's really my experience.
So I'm getting conflicting information from experts as to the demise of Google search. The no-click searches, et cetera. So our SEO guy, who I think is brilliant, his statement was that it doesn't really matter, like the AI coming on top of this, in that the way that the data is structured out there and what the algorithms say is important, it hasn't changed. The fundamentals, if you will. What do you say to that?
I think a lot of this is very industry specific.
Okay.
And I think a lot of this is very much tied to how much and what you do with content. I used to run a content team, and how we would pick out what articles to do is say, oh, well, here's the things we think our prospects are searching. And then, we put that in a spreadsheet and we look for the high volume ones.
Right.
Like, oh, well, way more people are using this term. There's 1,000 a month. This other one, there's only like 50 a month.
Right.
So we're going to write an article that goes after the 1,000-word one. Well, those articles that tend to have more traffic tend to be lower intent. That it's much more, hey, what is a thing? How does a thing work? That kind of stuff.
Right.
And what we're seeing is those low intent but high volume questions and keywords get answered by the AIs.
Okay.
And so there is a very clear pattern of the number of searches staying the same, but the number of clicks through to websites decreasing for those type of informational, questions.
Okay.
So if you have focused on that as part of your SEO, I think that's a danger.
Okay.
I'm not going to say it's wrong, but I do think it puts you at risk of, if your plan is to get traffic to your site from those keywords, I think you're in for a rough time in the future. And what we're recommending is people, focus, I think, a little more human and they write a little more to what people want and a little less what Google wants, and write more middle and bottom of the funnel content. And also with that, we recommend what we call, face versus faceless content, which is, content that has a voice, that has a point of view, and that sounds like it was written by an actual human, versus faceless content, which is probably better served up by an AI.
Okay.
And I think that is a big change in strategy.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily the death of SEO, and it's not people are doing stuff like wildly wrong, but the old days of, there was like skyscraper techniques and like this
Right.
other stuff of like how to choose what to do, I think are now outdated. And this is also sort of just setting aside ChatGPT or Claude or all these whiz bang tech stuff. This is just Google. Like, if we just focus only on Google, Google has made some really significant changes in what they're doing with search that, as a small business, as a creative, someone who's trying to make a profit, you really need to consider moving forward. So.
Okay, we're going to come back to that. You mentioned that you are familiar with Profit First. I'm going to ask you about that now.
Okay. We'll see how much I remember. It's been a little while.
Well, have you used it in your business? Have you met Mike? Like, what's your experience with Profit First?
Like I said, I'm part of a number of entrepreneurial founder startups. Most of them, not venture backed, but bootstrapped. We're bootstrapped currently. So that's just a very different calculus than, if we had gotten, $5 million in VC,
Yes.
on Monday, it's just a different thing. And so, a lot of people talk about it in terms of just trying to, and this is my summation, which may be wrong, but to really think about it in reality versus, what you need to survive, what you need to keep going, what needs to happen, and much less on hopes. And, I'd like to think I'm a practical person that's trying to do practical things. And I think it ties in well with that, just as sort of a philosophy. So.
Yeah, I think I think you're right. Have you read Mike's book?
Yes, but it has been
okay. I'm not quizzing you.
So.
I'm not quizzing you.
Yeah.
I recommend everybody read the book, because Mike's just a great guy and his stories are fascinating. And I had him on this show, and he recounted one of the stories from his book about like when he was just busted broke, and his daughter. He told his daughter she couldn't do her horse riding lessons, and she had run into her room and come back with her piggyback. And like, even in telling that story on our show, he just like rushed through it. He said, I have to rush through it because even now I start to tear up. I mean, like it's a really emotional story to him. And I think that's what made it so impactful, was his story about, like, as a business owner, multiple times he figured out that making money had never been important enough to him to focus on it. And I think you nailed it on the head as a philosophy, if you will, being intentional about making money and having that mindset is critical. Whether you use Profit First as a tool or some other tool, it doesn't really matter. The intent of saying, I'm doing this to make money, not just to, make more sales or create jobs or whatever, is critical. But somebody like you that's maybe pre-revenue, it's not a real practical tool, for sure. But yeah, I don't want to go down the whole VC route. Although
I have my own set of horror stories from that, but yes.
well, maybe we will. I think that one of the problems with the VC model, that I have participated in as an investor, and I've had clients that have received VC and advised them. I think one of the problems with VC is that money actually amplifies certain problems and covers up others. Whereas if you're, I did a software company many moons ago, and I spent 2 years and we generated revenue, but ultimately I decided that it wasn't going to work. And my fundamental problem in that was I had not proved the need in the marketplace. It was something that I perceived as a need, and it was very clear value proposition, but the people that actually used it didn't see it. So I had to sell them that they had a problem and then sell them on the solution, right?
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, so. Right. And so that was my first mistake. The second mistake was that I did not start simple enough and iterate. I tried to build out a software as the end goal, with all of the user interface and features that I envisioned, rather than starting with the most basic. And I remember an advisor who was helping me with it. He said, anything you do in an app, you can do in Excel. And if you can't do it in Excel first, then there's no reason to build the app, right? And I was like, oh.
Well, that's basically what we did, which is that we made a CSV file that, people could get started with, and then, it grew from there. So.
And so I'm curious your experience or thoughts on taking other people's money.
I think, two things. Like you sort of laid out, hey, can we start simple, or do we need to have, a full thing? And I think a lot of that really depends on the market. Like there's certain mature markets, there's less mature markets. With AI search, we're in a less mature market. And that less mature market means there's more opportunity, and I think you can start simpler. Whereas, and I think there's we have a lot of competitors right now. We are trying to ship more features. We're trying to do more. And at the same time, I think there's still a lot of questions around like, how viable is this? What's going to happen? All these different things. I think taking money for this type of thing, just as you said, has a benefit and a detriment. The benefit is it would allow us to hire more devs. We could do more work in that area. The downside is because it is changing so fast, it's also a lot easier to, run entirely the wrong direction. And, and it's when the direction is unclear, it doesn't matter how fast you accelerate. So,
yes.
I think that's the biggest danger and that's most of my experiences working with, venture capital things has been not even that it was a bad idea, but either the timing was wrong, that some underlying technology just wasn't there, or the market wasn't ready yet, or other things. And the end result was people spent a ton of money, and even worse, a ton of time, just literal, human years of effort on something that ultimately, you just kind of had to set aside. And, that's my own concerns with it more than anything else.
So let's talk about Noah Toa. Noah Toa. How does this work? So let's say I come and I say, Michael, know some people have found us through ChatGPT. How can you help us?
Sure. So I think step one is we have some assumptions. We make some assumptions. One of them is that people are still people, even with all this AI stuff, and that they're trying to accomplish things. And so, something that comes up in SEO a lot is search intent, which is, hey, what is this person actually searching for? Are they looking for apple pie, a recipe, or apple pie the movie, whatever it is.
Right.
And we think that there is that same intent is expressed in AI. When you type into ChatGPT, hey, what's an apple pie recipe? And so based on that, what we do is we take all of the keywords that a site currently ranks for, and we do what we call like a deep classification of them. And what that does is it breaks them out into like, are these people that that already know about you and they're looking for like more information? Is it new people that are looking for a solution? Is it something else? And we take all of those intents and we take them and we turn them into questions and then let you choose like, oh, well, out of these, here's the ones that make sense. We mentioned before some real content strategy changes where maybe we don't want to even attempt to go after these informational ones at the top. We want to go for the ones that are closer to the bottom of the funnel that are a lot more like, hey, what's the best solution for this? Or what's the best way to do this? And track those. And then from that, across ChatGPT and Google's Gemini and Claude and all these different services, we ask those questions and then look at the responses to see what comes back. And that gives you sort of a baseline, one of which is it shows you where you stand now. And two, it shows the format and kind of what they're looking for. A real interesting thing, and I think something that the AI services have done a very poor job in messaging is how often this data is updated. Where, if you look at the versions of it, well, ChatGPT had 3.5 and they only just now announced 4.5 and some other versions. They've actually had something like 20 updates in the last 2 years, where either the data has really been updated or how it makes decisions about what to recommend has been updated. So there's actually a lot of volatility in this. And if you look at the old responses, if you ask like, hey, what's a good service for XYZ, it would just give you a list. And now it actually breaks out, oh, this is the best for this category. Here's the key features in this category. And so the people that are having the most success with our platform are able to go in, look at that format, and then write their content to it to say like, oh, we're actually the best for, small business or for creatives or for, industry professionals in this niche. And that's something that's real different than, what's come out before.
So at the end of the day, you're giving me recommendations for my content, my SEO. Like this is what I need to change, update, focus on.
At this point, I think it's less recommendations. And, things are changing very fast. It's hard to know where you stand. I think we're giving you a foundation to start making those decisions.
Okay.
So
perfect. Is it an ongoing service or is it okay.
So every week we update those numbers and you can see a report of like, hey, we're doing better. We're doing worse. We also have some tools that in the same way, Google has a bot called Googlebot that comes and indexes your website. And then that indexed information shows up in Google. So when people search in Google, they can find it. We have a similar tool that checks if all these different AI services can access your website and do the same thing. So there is a language piece of this as well, which I think is interesting, and which is that we talk a lot about, Googlebot, it indexes your website. And we talk about AI services like ChatGPT. We talk about, they scrape your website. They take all your information. And I am not an AI purist. I do not recommend putting all of your information into the AIs and just hoping for things. But I do worry that creative professionals in particular are not, I'm not even going to say overly concerned, but they aren't discerning in where and how the AI services are interacting with them as a brand, as a business, as, creative output, where I think there are a lot of lines in there, and we just want people to be educated about where and what they should do.
So can you give us a use case as an example
Sure.
of somebody who's worked with?
A marketing site. I don't know if there's a good example from you think as a good creative professional we should use as an example, just as a category.
No.
Okay.
But marketing's fine. Yeah.
Okay. So most everybody has a website,
Right.
and on that website, it has just some basic business information about you. Here's where you can find more information about me. Here's how you can get in touch. Here's how you can do, just what I'm about, the kind of things I solve or the kind of things I create. That's valid information that you want to have in ChatGPT, in Claude, and all these other services. And I think what people don't want is to be replaced. What you don't want is your book that you've written to be spit back out by any of these services to replace what all the hard work you put into it. And in general, the services are very concerned about that as well, where they certainly want to read all this information and they want to have it come back, but there's a lot of safeguards in there to make sure it's not a substitution. Excuse me.
Is that primarily because they're worried about copyright infringement or?
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
I think bluntly, yes, that these are capitalist corporations. They are worried about copyright. And I also don't think that's a business they want to be in. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. And there's a lot of good reasons for it. Something that leaks a lot are what's called the system prompts, which is that like, hey, I go to ChatGPT, I type in something, and what actually happens is there's a system prompt, which is literally just like paragraphs of text that they have written that give information about how the model should work. And then it adds your prompt at the end of it, and then it sends it to the AI model to get the response. I've looked at tons and tons of these. The most recent one that was leaked was Claude's, and they actually had in there 4 books, never quote more than 25 words out of any book in a row. So, you can give a quote. So it has to know all the words in the book,
Right.
Has to have it all indexed. So no matter what someone asks for, it can give the relevant portion. And that's a tricky thing. I mean, so there's been a lot of, let's just say bad pirating websites that have been indexed, excuse me, that have been indexed by these AI services in order to get that information that now they can hand back. So if someone's looking for like, oh, what's a profit first? You may come up in that result. And the reason for that is that they did that, but it's never going to be a substitution that it's as good as just like,
Right.
getting. So, and that's what I mean by lines. I don't think people should put everything into these. I don't think, you should necessarily trust all these AI services to do what they're doing. But from a very practical ground level, as of right now, they are not, enough to, there's an equation there, in the same way there's an equation with Google. Like, is it worth them indexing my site and sending traffic? And it's different for AI, but I think it's still something where it's of benefit to people that are trying to get customers, that are trying to have their name out there. And how the trends are going, again, just looking only at Google, you need to be there if you want to be found, if you want to be part of the discussion, if you want to get, new customers from these channels.
So you I think had mentioned that you have some thoughts on how that would be utilized in the podcast industry.
Sure.
Was that my imagination, or did you say that?
I think it's all industries,
Right.
like, because at the end of the day, this is just becoming the interface to search.
Right.
So, if you look up, hey, what's the best podcast for entrepreneurs? Let's take that as an example. That might be something that you want to rank for. So my recommendation to you, if we were sitting down, would be, hey, what we need to do is repeat this message in as many different channels as possible. So I want to make sure my website can be reached by all these AI bots. I want to sort of clearly state, hey, I think we're one of the best podcasts for, entrepreneurs. Here's the reasons why. Here's my unique take on it. You wrote a book. I mean, these are all awesome things and reasons why. And then I would take that same information and, in traditional SEO, there's always this worry about a duplicate content penalty, which is that like, oh, if the same content shows up somewhere else, it lowers the rank for both of these things.
Right.
And that's really out the window now. So now, my recommendation is you take that same article and you're publishing it on LinkedIn. You're taking that same article, you're making it into a YouTube video. You're doing all these different things to get that same message out about like, hey, here's why we're the best for this niche in this way. And, a focus on, creation that's lower in the funnel, and then a focus on distribution to get the message out there as many times, to get the AI models to read it in as many different places and to sort of come to a consensus. They're like, oh yeah, we should be recommending Christian's podcast for this. So
I'm going to ask an interesting question. Well, it's interesting to me. Google had a feature called a knowledge panel. And a couple of years ago, that was like for an individual, it was like the gold standard.
Yeah.
Like if Google had created a knowledge panel for you, then you're known. It sounds like what you're describing there is essentially reaching that threshold with AI for whatever, your business, yourself.
Yeah.
Is that a fair comparison?
I think it's very similar, which is that, a phrase that's come up a lot for us is ChatGPT is now our most popular and least well-trained representative of our company, where people are constantly asking ChatGPT all sorts of questions about it. And, it's not quite as distinct as having a knowledge panel, which was the search feature that was there. But certainly, you could go to ChatGPT right now and ask, who is Christian Brim? Does it come up with the right information? Does it recommend the right things? And, again, Noah Toa, we're trying to think about knowledge. We're trying to get the right information into the right places. And I think that is very important. And there's a lot of aspects in there that are beyond search. We deal with a lot of software as a service businesses. And a big thing with those is stuff like HIPAA compliance, or can you operate in the EU for GDPR? Are you SOC 2? All of these, acronym certifications, but there's that for every industry. Like, hey, I'm looking for someone in my town for help with, getting something done. That's not necessarily a search of like, hey, what's the best thing in this area? It's this sort of underlying knowledge that's still important to impart because it has these ramifications for, well, if I'm looking for software and they don't work in healthcare, I can't use them. They're not even going to make my list. So,
right. Okay. Now I'm going to pivot again.
Sure.
Where do you see Noah Toa, if it's successful as you envision it? Where do you see it in 3 years? What does it look like?
I think it looks like a service that has more and more knowledge of, your brand, your business, and it's able to help you more and more proactively in terms of both figuring out what you should, address in these different services, where to distribute that information, and, what to write on in lots of different ways. A challenging thing that I've always struggled with is that I feel like, I should be able to write a thing one time and then, that's good. When what I really need to do is take that same message and, every week, turn the dial a little bit and have a little bit of a different perspective on it, or describe it in a different way or a different facet. And, that's how I actually learn about stuff, is I don't read it one time and go, okay, great. Well, that's in my head forever. Like Profit First, like a lot of that is accumulated, culturally through talking to other people, or like, I started to implement Profit First in my business and it's been really well. And so, it's the accumulation of all these smaller factors. And that's how, we want to be a part of helping, businesses and brands and sites, execute on that in a way that doesn't make them go nuts. Because it's a daunting perspective thing to have to do. So.
Yeah. And I was reading an article this morning that, some guy said, that was in the space is like, turn AI off now. Like and I'm like, well, of course that's not going to happen. But I think that much like the transformation of the world, the society, what virtually everything that the Industrial Revolution had.
Mm.
This is something that is going to fundamentally change society, and that sounds grandiose, but I don't think so. I think that it is going to change fundamentally a lot of things, but the problem is we can't predict it. It's unpredictable. I don't care what anybody says. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like if you're going to go back to the guy that owned the horse and carriage pre-industrial revolution, and ask him to predict, Wi-Fi and the internet. No, there's no way there's no way. And I think we're in a similar situation. We can't.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I do think there's a time horizon on this, which is
Sure.
that I think we've seen two very large societal impacts from technological changes, which is one, the introduction of the internet, and two, the introduction of smartphones. Like that, those have had impacts on society. We're still all people. We're still all here, have
Right.
kids we're trying to raise in the right way and do all these things. I still read a lot of books. I still do a lot of stuff. It happens that I read the books on my phone now when I'm waiting in line
Right.
at the grocery store instead. So there's changes and there's not changes. I think we're still in the infancy of AI having lots of these changes, and it is changing a lot of things for the worse. I think it is a big struggle in a lot of cases. I think it's scary even for my own stuff. But I do think there's a lot of benefit of it as well. You mentioned industrialization. Part of that was that there's a lot fewer people working on farms now.
Yeah.
Like there used to be, 90% of people worked on farms. And at the turn of the century, it was like 30%. And now it's something like 3%. And, there's a lot more people that are doing, creative work. There's a lot more people that are doing, I think, interesting work because of that automation. Certainly, even in, creative areas, it's still nice to have a spell checker.
Yes.
At some level that's doing intellectual work.
Yes.
A grammar checker is doing intellectual work. And in the area of software development, AI tooling has just exploded as a useful thing. People debate a lot about it, but I personally found it incredibly useful. And oftentimes, not even in writing code, but understanding it to be able to say, like, hey, just what does this do? And, this is an interesting, this is off the topic of AI search, but, my wife and I were part of a book trivia thing at the local library, which was like, hey, read these 4 books, go there, answer questions about them, and the team that answers the most questions wins. And we beat everybody. We beat everybody because I cheated, quote unquote, with AI. And how I cheated was I bought all the books DRM free. I spent probably way too much money on them, but I bought them all. Even if they were on Kindle Unlimited, I bought them all. So this was legal. I took the books and broke them out chapter by chapter and had AI generate questions for me based on that. So this wasn't added to the index. It wasn't anything else. It was like a local AI that kind of did this. So it spit out questions. And then I used a different tool to generate like a super mini niche website that just let us study this. And so it just randomized all these questions and built this study guide. And that was a very efficient way to do that. It wasn't, out of bounds. And
what was the prize that you put this much effort into it?
My wife's sister was one of the competing teams.
I see.
And so there was a lot of family pride in this. And there was a lot of, but yeah. And I think I got a $15 gift certificate to Barnes and Noble. So this wasn't about the money. This had, deeper stakes.
Yes.
But I think it was really interesting because, certainly there's a manual way to do that. I could have hired people to read these books, write questions. I could have hired someone to write a special website for me, but that's way too much. That's thousands and thousands of dollars. But, to prep myself for this, fun activity, I was able to really rapidly do this. This was like an hour or two of work. So that's a change. And I think that's a positive change in terms of learning, in terms of like what's automated and what's not.
Did you tell your sister-in-law how you beat her?
Yes.
You
So
did.
she wants to
Okay.
be on our
Okay.
team next year.
I
So
see.
all's well
Okay.
that ends well. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to your point, I think all technologies give us efficiencies that give us extra bandwidth, right?
Mhm.
But I think that the interesting thing about the human condition is that we always seem to find a way to fill the bandwidth, right?
Mhm.
Like I mean, I go back to like telephones and, landlines, and back when you had to pay for long distance
Yeah.
and all of this. And so like what's happened is not that the technology exploded. People didn't spend less on their phones. They're spending the same amount for telecommunications, maybe even more. But that's kind of my point is that we don't take those efficiencies and shrink what we do or spend. We use those efficiencies and just do more.
Yeah. I think the other piece of this is there's a quality aspect, which is that, I am not particularly worried about AI taking over like all the writing and doing all the art in the world. But I do think, and even something closer to me, all the software development,
Right.
what I think it does is it raises the waterline so that the average project now is of higher quality, or you can say the
Correct.
average project has more features or looks better or works better than it did before. And, it's still up to humans to be the part on top, which is,
Right.
we're orchestrating this, we're adding the extra thing. And sort of this is by definitional, which is AI pulls in all this information and gives you the consensus of it. Like, oh, here's the best way to do this. It's not the best. It's a better way to think about it. It's the most common way, So the most widely agreed upon way. And there's lots of tricks to get different, kinds of answers. But I think that's really how I view things, which is that it's still not to the point where you could get a perfect article that's amazing out of any of the AI services, that's better than one that someone sat down and worked on. My hope is that that's how people take this, that they use these tools to improve their baseline, to improve how quickly they can do this stuff, to, more quickly, have different viewpoints. And, you know, I do think the industry is moving that way, and I'm hopeful for those reasons. So
Yeah, and you and I may be completely wrong, and we
maybe.
are subject to our AI overlords in 5 years, and who knows.
Yeah.
How do people find more about Noatoa and what they do, Michael?
Sure. You can go to Noatoa, KNOWOTA.com. Noatoa. You can put your website in and it will give you a free report like the deep classification, like we talked about, and, put it through 10 questions through ChatGPT on the free plan. And, if none of that works, you can email me, mike@noatoa.com. I do respond to my own emails, and we have a newsletter that talks about this. I'm trying to keep the theme. I try to write the newsletter in a way that if you're listening to this and you read the newsletter, you will know I wrote it
Right.
directly, that this was not like spit out. And I just hope that everyone, considers these tools, considers where they can take advantage of them, and really just want to see people succeed. So
I love it. Listeners, we'll have those links in the show notes. If you like what you've heard, please rate the podcast, share the podcast, subscribe to the podcast. If you don't like what you've heard, shoot us a message and let us know what you want to hear, and we'll get rid of Michael. Until then, ta-ta for now.